welcome to Talking Youth Work. My name is Anita Silva, and together with Rui Branco, we interview experts and practitioners that have a say when it comes to innovation in youth work. This current series is funded by the project Inception of Learning, that is funded by the European Commission through the Erasmus Plus Youth Key Action 2 projects. This project aims to support youth workers, trainers, and educators in delivering quality learning experiences in the field of youth in the context of Generation Z and Generation Alpha. In this episode, we had the pleasure of speaking with Ashley Fell, a social researcher, TEDx speaker, and the director of advisory at McCrindle, an Australian company known for its cutting-edge research on generational trends. Ashley is also the author of two insightful books, Work, Wellbeing and Generation Alpha. She's also the host of McCrindle's own podcast, The Future Report. In our conversation, we explored the differences between millennials, or Generation Y, Gen Z, who are the young people we work with today, and Generation Alpha, who are now 15 or less. We talked about how generational behaviors are influenced by major global events, like 9/11, who shaped a generation, and the COVID pandemic shaped maybe another generation, as well as by technology, workplace culture, and broader societal shifts. One of the key themes we talked about was the impact of technology on Gen Z and on Gen Alpha. Sometimes in surprising ways, I have to say, and I was definitely surprised, but I leave that for you to find out when you hear the podcast. We also explored how these younger generations approach learning and what that means for us as youth workers and educators. How can we adapt? What do they need from us? And to finalize, we touched on essential topics like mental health, psychological safety, and the importance of autonomy for young people today. I definitely walked away from this chat with new insights, and I think you will do too. So with no further ado, let's talk youth work. Hi everyone, good morning. Hi Rui and hi Ashley. Thank you for accepting our invitation. It's so great to have you here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Looking forward to our chat today.
So we always start by telling our audience where we're zooming from. Ashley, where are you sitting right now in this little ball in the universe?
Yes, I wish I was sitting somewhere in Europe. I love Europe, but I am coming to you today from Sydney, Australia. Yes, it's a real place. I've heard some people think it's so far away. Does it even exist? But it's a real place with beautiful beaches. So yeah, from Sydney, Australia, which is where I was born and raised.
It is a beautiful place indeed. What about you, Rui? Where are you sitting today?
I'm always at the same place, like we discussed. I'm the one that doesn't travel. I'm near Lisbon, Cascais.
Yes, and today I'm very close to, actually. I'm also sitting next to Lisbon. Well, welcome. Today we are here to talk about Generation Alpha. And Ashley, we know that you have a treasure of knowledge about this topic. But first, we always like to ask our guests, how did they got here? How did you get to start exploring this? So, what was your professional journey, and what led you to focus on studying generational trends in general?
Yeah, I love sharing about that. And I think it's always helpful even for young people to hear about how certain individuals got into their respective careers and what the journey was like. So for me, it was quite a linear progression, which is unlike a lot of young people today. But I went straight from school into university, where I studied social inquiry within the field of communications. And then I went straight into this job that I'm still in today. So I've been here for almost 12 years, which is a lot longer than most people tend to stay in one job. I was hired into into this organization as a research executive, and then quite quickly moved into more of the communication of our research and our insights. And that began with sharing and writing articles and working with the media. And today that has evolved to sharing presentations. I get to travel around and speak. I've been to Portugal once before for a conference, which was amazing, and America and different parts of Europe, but also within Australia and New Zealand, which is a bit closer. And I get to do about 50 presentations a year about Generation Alpha, about different topics around the future. And I host a podcast as well. So it's more about the communication of our research and bringing it to life. And in terms of the generations piece, that's been a key area of focus for our company for as long as it's been in existence. We're a social research company, so we study human behavior and the generations and categorizing people by what year they were born and looking at the events and the technologies that have shaped them is really central to that. So it tends to overlay everything that we put our hand to. And the other cool thing I'll say is that Mark McCrindle, our founder and principal, is actually credited with naming Generation Alpha, which is a very random claim to fame, but we'll take it. And we love to research them, and he and I have written a book about them. And yeah, it's always fascinating to see what the next generation is like and what characteristics they have and how they're different to generations who've gone before. So that's a little bit about, my journey and the work that we do here at McCrindle in terms of that generations piece.
That's wonderful. And maybe let's clarify for people who are not so much clear about what these generations are and where they are. Can you quickly let us know, what is the time brackets before millennials, Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha?
Yes. So I wish in some cases there was like a universal generations definition. But if you ask different research companies, they do tend to have different years. But the years that we look at are in 15-year time spans. So the millennials, or the Generation Ys, which is my generation, we were born between 1980 and 1994. So we're really in our 30s and 40s this year. And then following them, we have Generation Z, born between 1995 and 2009. And then we have Generation Alpha, born between 2010 and 2024, which now means we have another generation as of this year being born. And because Mark McCrindle sort of brought in the Gen Alpha term with the Greek alphabet, that means the next generation born as of this year is Generation Beta. So that's how we define them. The 15-year time span, we find that works really well. It's a scientific approach. It allows for enough change and analysis. Some people argue there's so much change that it should be shorter, but we agree that there's a lot of change. But if we had shorter generations, it would I think it would be too much. We just have too much to discuss. So that's kind of why we like that 15-year time span.
So it helps also on the discussion, on the conversations around these topics, right?
Yeah, but I was thinking about the generations and the 15 years, because generations will have different characteristics, adaptations to the changing of the world. But isn't the adaptation slower than the change?
Yes, in some cases, for sure. And the pace of change is so fast these days, especially around technology. And some people argue that we should have generations based on when the new technologies came out. Funnily enough, with Generation Alpha, they began being born in 2010, and that was the same year that the iPad was released and Instagram was launched. So they won't know a world without those devices. Generation Beta, they began this year, but artificial intelligence or ChatGPT kind of came out last year. So not the exact year that they were born, but around that time. And so Gen Beta won't know a world without AI. And so, yes, the pace of change is so much faster. The rate of adoption is definitely not as fast. So there's definitely, I think, a lot to discuss there. And of course, as you look at older generations who've experienced more change than anyone, especially our older generations in our communities, I'm sure they can attest to that as well.
Yeah.
And looking at these different generations, what would you say are the main between these three last generations? Gen Y or millennials, Gen Z and Gen A. What are the main shifts? We talked about the technological one, of course, and the adoption of technologies, our relationship with technologies. What other shifts do you see that are kind of very clear between these generations?
I mean, I think a lot does focus on technology. And every time we've run surveys or focus groups and we ask people, how do you think young people today, how are they different to our generation or to your generation? I think technology is the first answer and the most obvious answer, because it has so many other impacts on our education, our information absorption, our attention spans. So that is definitely a big one, and how we market and communicate and how we like to engage. But even in terms of global events, I mean, there are so many different ones we could choose. And we have this saying that every generation is a product of the transformative technologies and societal events that happened in their formative years. And for us, we talk about Generation Y, or the millennials, really being shaped by September 11. We talked about Gen Z really being shaped by sort of the global financial crisis in some ways, or their life, maybe not themselves, but their world and their context. And for the Gen Alphas, I mean, the obvious one is the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and how it impacted schooling and work and all of our lives. So those events, I think, are helpful to look at and to signal, okay, well, how does this generation behave and what do they value, the technology. But even in terms of like leadership style, I think that's changed across the generations, where historically, I mean, if we go back to even the baby boomers, they were a lot engaged in more worlds and classrooms and areas where it was hierarchical and command and control. And today we're in a more empowering era. And so I think for Gen Y, or the millennials, we'd say that they were engaged and raised in a guiding era. For Gen Z, an empowering sort of leadership era. And for the Alphas, it seems a bit more even inspiring, and they're looking to be inspired and have meaning and purpose in new ways. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different areas that we can look at. Even another big one I'll just mention before I wrap up my answer is even where we get influenced. And one of the big shifts we've seen, I think, for the millennials was they were really influenced by their peers, which every generation is, especially when they're young, the peer influence. But then for Generation Z, and as they grew up around these social media forums and technologies, it did seem like those forums, those online places were a bit more influential for them. And for the Alphas, even this virtual world with chatbots and virtual reality and the metaverse in places like Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite, these virtual worlds are where they're sort of influenced. And I think in the future, we'll see even artificial intelligence influencing us and where we go for trust. So yeah, there's so many different areas, but there are a couple of the ones that sort of stand out to me in terms of how the generations are different.
Yeah, you talked a lot about the technology, and it's been shaping the generations for a few years now. But my contact with especially younger people and teenagers in particular, they're getting a bit tired of technology, because they're spending a lot of time. But when you talk to them, some have spoken to me about, I wish I didn't have a smartphone, because the constant pinging and being on top of things, it can be tiring. And I feel that the pushback against technology won't be like, we got to take the power back, but something smoother, that younger people are getting tired of it, because they miss the real connection as human beings. What's your intake in this?
Yeah, I completely agree. And we've seen it in some of our studies. We labeled one of our trends around this. We said it's kind of like the digital detox, where young people are self-identifying that there are cool benefits with technology and immediacy and convenience. There's also some pretty big challenges that come with that. I mean, you might hear the joke of FOMO, fear of missing out, but that's a real thing. And the comparison culture, and like you said, always being interrupted, the impact on sleep, there's impact on mental health. There's so many areas that it can negatively impact this generation. And I think with Generation Y, or the millennials, my generation, I'm at the younger end of the millennials, and we had MySpace, and we didn't have Facebook in high school. We got it at university, but not at high school. And I often think I'm kind of glad I didn't have social media when I was at school, going through puberty and all those changes and peer pressure. But Gen Z, I think, were the real experiment. They had it from a really young age, and we were all learning about it, their parents and their family members. But now with the alphas, I think we've had social media particularly and some of these technologies for long enough that we can know when to put the boundaries in place. And what's also really funny to think about with the generations is with Generation Z, they're, aged in their late teens and 20s, but they're also reaching 30. And so they are this emerging generation of parents. The older Gen Zs are the parents of Gen Beta, which is crazy to think. And we are seeing in the early studies we've done that pushback that you mentioned, where they're going, oh, we didn't love what we had, so we're going to put some parameters and guidelines in place. And we know the importance of the real environment and getting out in nature and having boundaries. And so, yeah, I definitely think we're seeing that pushback. One other really interesting statistic we uncovered, it was from a study of Gen Zs, or of all generations, but this stat is about Gen Z in Australia. It was 57% of Gen Z wish social media had never been created, which is pretty crazy. Almost 60% saying we wish we never had it.
Yeah.
And yes, it can be cool to connect with your friends, but it also brings some challenges. So, yeah, I think we will see, like you said, not a complete disassociation and separation from it, but trying to bring some balance to how we use it.
This is fantastic. So, well, I'm trying to wrap up for our listeners a little bit what we're talking about. So most of the youth workers that we serve, that are part of our audience, also in the podcast, they work mostly with Gen Z right now, right? So they work with people in their teens and in their 20s. And what we are seeing is that this work about studying generations is also about studying what shapes a generation, from what I heard you saying. So it's about the global events that shaped the formating years of that generation, but also about what type of organizations were present where they belonged, right? Either the way school was kind of seen, or their jobs, how organizations and how leadership is organized, and of course what technology was available that shaped their experience during their early years. And this is new for me, that what you were just saying, that Gen Z maybe had this kind of immersion into social media, into these new technologies, and was very maybe influenced, maybe overwhelmed by it, let's say. And right now, what we see for the next generation is not a continuation of that path, because that's the fear, I think, of many educators, that the newer generation will be even more addicted, not managing to function without it. But what we see is a bit of a pushback of people saying, we want actually more connection. If we could, we would be playing outside. If we would be allowed, we would be playing outside, right? I was reading something about this, that actually a lot of young people are saying this, that they wish they could have more autonomy to play, but actually adults nowadays are very restrictive about where kids can play and meet, and that kind of makes it also hard for them to find moments and spaces where they can connect to each other.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation to note. And here, I guess we're talking about like Gen X and Gen Y, or the millennials, the parents who, of course, out of the best intentions are trying to protect their children and wrap them up and protect them from the evils of the world. But almost we've swung too far, I think, in that regard, because we haven't enabled them to kind of go outside and experience the world. And I guess the irony in some ways is that because of technology, let's say, we now have access to more information as parents and as leaders and educators, the good and the bad. And when we think about the bad and we hear about all those true crime podcasts and stories, and we think, oh, I need to keep my children inside, away from those people with evil intentions, but maybe we'll just give them a device or a screen. But actually, we know that children need that kind of ability to explore and to test boundaries and to be outside with their friends. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting in terms of, like, at the end of the day, like, yes, we believe in the work that we do, that generations are different, but in the same breath, there are similarities between generations. And for children, regardless of whether you're a child, you are a child in the Gen Y stage or you're a child in Gen Z stage, the idea that we want to explore and have fun and be with our friends and experience the world. So yeah, I think it is a really interesting shift that we've seen. At the same time, though, regardless, I think we're still seeing, younger generations engage with technology, and it's always evolving. And I've read some things that say behind every device, there's a group of, 10 or 15 developers who are making that device as addictive as possible and as enticing and as visually engaging. And it's addictive for adults, let alone children. And so I can understand, of course, why there is that lure, but I think it's also encouraging. And I hope people listening are encouraged, if you're a youth worker or an educator, that kids need to get outside. Kids need to engage with the world, whether they're teenagers or younger. And if we can create environments and spaces for them to be able to do that, I think we do them a great service there.
Even the other day, I was explaining to my younger daughter, she's 13 now, that it's an unfair fight. She's fighting against 30, 40-year-old developers, psychologists, behaviorists, and it's an unfair fight for teenager and kids to grow up in a world that has all the tools to make them addicted to their mobile phones. And sometimes this was because she didn't comply with the boundary that was set around technology, and she was trying to get herself like guilty of doing something wrong. And I had to explain, you did what those people want you to do, but not we as parents want you to do, because it's not good for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the tension there as well is for parents too. I think we're acknowledging here in this conversation that there are downsides to technology, but we also know that the future will be technology enabled. And so where you draw the line, where you put the boundary, how you give them space away from devices, but also help them to know how to use them for their future job, for their future life, to maximize the benefits they bring. Yeah, it's tricky to in the ideal world to grab hold of the good parts and kind of push away the bad parts. But yeah, like you said, it is addictive, and it is a little bit of an unfair fight in that regard, for sure.
Yes, and I think that leads us to a topic that I want to explore with both of you, which is how Gen A actually behaves in the learning spaces in regards of this technology, but also in regards to communication, to connection, to how they like to learn. But before that, I had a question that I am really curious about. I was reading some of your statements about Gen A, and one of them left me curious, and I would love to hear more about it. You said that Gen A lives are post-life stage, their learning is post-linear, and their careers are post-structural. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So what we mean by that is, I guess, historically, for generations like mine, and I shared that about my own career journey, it was very from school into, university into the workforce. That's not really, I guess, the particular way that we're seeing younger people engage with their careers, which is why we kind of call it post-structural. I guess, even with the post-structural in terms of learning, we're definitely seeing as well the introduction of hybrid, the introduction of remote learning, schools going online. And so it's really fascinating, I think, to observe and to think about how careers and learning and life does look different for the various generations. We do see that these emerging generations for Gen Z and Gen Alpha really are quite different to that of you or I. And, you know, their learning can take place anywhere. So it's not 9 to 5. It's not as structured as it once was for you or I when we were at school. There were more boundaries, whereas today they've got, through technology and devices, access to information at their fingertips. They can kind of go through many different jobs and careers. Our prediction here in Australia particularly is that a Gen Z today will have 18 jobs across 6 careers in their life, which is a lot of jobs and a lot of different careers. And they might study, then work, then travel, then study again. The world's kind of opened up to them. The world's more globally connected for them than it has ever been. So that's what we mean by those terms. It relates to, I think, their education, their life stages, and it's just kind of a bit more fluid and flexible today than it was in the past, where it was more straightforward, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And in regards to Gen A, so kids that are now in their very early teens or younger, right? What are the main characteristics? You already said, well, they were very influenced by the pandemic. How did that actually influence them? What are the characteristics that define, in broad terms, because we know this is obviously not a generalization, but what trends do you see in this generation?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few key phrases that we assign to both Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and we might talk about them in slightly different ways. The first is digital, of course, that they're engaged in the world. They're used to online learning. They don't need to go into the library and look up the encyclopedia for something. It's at their fingertips. It's very different to how previous generations engaged with content and information. So they're digital. I would also say they're virtual, especially the alphas. And that term I used earlier with the metaverse, that kind of got a bit of attention a few years ago, and it's kind of like, oh, well, what is that? But I actually think we're seeing it in the alphas with those platforms that they're on, like Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite, where they're engaged in the virtual world, and the physical and the virtual and the digital's kind of all melting, and they're building things in those worlds. They're not just sitting there sort of passively consuming content. So I think there's some characteristics. We also say that they're mobile because of that 18 jobs across 6 careers sort of statistic, that they'll have more jobs and careers. They'll probably live in more homes. They're less likely to own their own home, because owning a home is very expensive. I mean, especially here in Sydney in Australia, as you might have heard. Okay, good to know we're not the only ones battling that housing crisis. So I think they're some of the characteristics. The other two, I would say, we say that Gen Alpha and Gen Z are visual. Now, I would argue that all generations are visual. I think all of us would like to watch a video about something rather than read a 60-page PDF document about it. But I think that the younger someone is, the more likely they are to expect the information to be communicated in a visual way because of social media and the short nature of videos and content. And if you think about TikTok or Instagram, their content on that is that people are really creative. Younger generations are really, really cool to see their creativity flow on there, their humor. And so they're used to kind of creating and consuming content that's visual, that's easy to understand. And the other, I guess, characteristic is, we've definitely seen with both Gen Z and Gen Alpha that they're really interested and engaged with the concerns of the world and of the environment. And I think that's because they are globally connected, more informed than ever before. We did this study about what are some of the themes that you learn or you learnt about when you were young, and we asked it of all generations. And there's themes like teamwork and encouragement and kindness that every generation said, yeah, the shows we're watching in our formative years when we're young, that is a priority. But the difference, the biggest one, was learning to care for the environment. I think that's been a real issue that's risen on the agenda. I think also diversity and inclusion is a big one that younger people are just more likely to hear about and to learn about than those of us who are a bit older. So yeah, there's some of the characteristics I think that younger people, particularly the Gen Alphas, are having and are, I guess, exhibiting to us so far.
Yeah, you were saying that generation, they're visual. We all are visual, like you said. And the other day, I held a focus group with 17-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And the question that came up, they're not really into books, but their preferred way of knowing about something and learning is asking a person that they knows about the subject. It's visual, but it's in another way. And the videos brought that human component to learning outside the books, because the books didn't have a lot of human interaction. The videos have a little video interaction and the human interaction. That's why that I feel that we will see this going back to talking the caring adult or the teacher or the youth worker, because one the thing that they brought up is it's difficult to trust most of the things that they see now, and parents and teachers are still a place of trust.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit ironic in some ways that we talk about, one of the characteristics of all of us today in this world enabled by technology is greater personalization. And the algorithms, on Netflix and Spotify, they feed you like I get personalized content for Ashley because it knows and it's tracking what I like, how long I watch something. But it doesn't know my heart and my desires at a human level. And so, like you said, in terms of, I think when we helping young people go, yes, we're in an era of personalization, but you can't get personal advice about your life and your career from social media that's being blasted out to everyone. Algorithm, arguably artificial intelligence and ChatGPT is always kind of going there, and it's more interactive than social media has been and the algorithm. But yeah, it goes back to those timeless truths of connection and belonging and being seen and heard for who we are. And the best way to do that is through the people that know us and love us and want the best for us, not to sell us a product or gain our attention from the device. So yeah, I think that's a timeless human need that's more important than ever. If we can help them understand that, we do them a great service.
So we're talking about how these generations Z and A kind of what are their trends, what are their interests, how they prefer to navigate the world, let's say. And I heard already a lot of things that influence the learning spaces, which is where I want to get to in terms of, supporting youth workers and educators understand how they can design learning experiences that make sense for these generations and that fit their preferences. You said that they are definitely more keen on visuals, on receiving their information or managing the information visually. Do you think there is, because I see this, I don't know if it's a misconception, but do you think that there is less capacity in the current generations of discussion, of dialogue, of talking about things? Because I've heard this from adults that younger people, they don't know how to discuss things or talk about things. Maybe they're lacking social skills. I wonder if that's just a misconception, just a stereotype that you're creating, or if there's some deeper truth behind that. Do you think there's less capacity for young people to engage verbally with one another and around topics?
I think we have a really high view of young people today, and we try and bust the stereotypes. I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha are inquisitive. They're curious. I think they are engaging in dialogue, but it does look different to that from previous generations. I think one other area we're seeing a lot in young people in how they learn is not through the traditional books, but through podcasts and storytelling and different ways of kind of engaging with things. Now, that's from a lot of the research we've done. I have heard from friends and family and teachers that some people do think, who work quite closely with youth, that they aren't able to engage in dialogue maybe as well in those traditional forms as previous generations. I think some people put that down to the impact of COVID and the pandemic, and that for a few certain grades or ages, there was a big gap in those key years. And understandably, like I remember with my nieces and nephews who were kind of sort of 5 to 10 years old, that during the pandemic, we hadn't seen them for a while, and they were a bit kind of nervous to be around us. Whereas before that, when we saw them regularly, it wasn't the case. So it has an impact, but I also think children are really resilient, and they bounce back from things quite quickly. So, I mean, I think there is a little bit of merit to that, in that we're seeing younger generations kind of engage in dialogue, in discussion differently. You might have heard as well, we got it here in Australia for sure, the Gen Z stare. I don't know if that reached you guys.
No, not yet. Please explain.
Okay. It was the idea that, especially in like cafes and restaurants, you might go in and you'll say, oh, can I get a latte? And they just kind of stare at you, and there's not as much customer service and those sorts of things. And part of me goes, but wasn't that the case for every generation? Like there's this element of, it was always the case for youth that they want to be out playing with their friends and hanging out with people their own age, not engaging in dialogue with, millennials or that kind of thing. So I guess my perspective on it is that there is maybe, like, these generations are different, but they have grown up in different times. They're a product of the environments and the context that's shaped them. But I do think at the core of it, Gen Z are impressive, and I think they will engage in dialogue around things that matter a lot to them. They are passionate, and they want to work with purpose. And so if we can tap into what makes them tick and energizes them, I think we can definitely get them sort of in that discussion. And part of it might be even how we're communicating what we want them to engage in dialogue about. If they can't see the relevance of it, they may just tune out and step back and be a bit more passive. So showing the relevance, making it visual, bringing in that storytelling component. I think anyone who's tasked with messaging or communicating, whether you're a professional sort of conference speaker like me or a teacher in a classroom, it's hard these days. We've all got short attention spans, so we've got to work a bit harder than we maybe had to in the past, when someone's attention was sort of guaranteed if they were in the room with you. It's not that way anymore.
Yeah, because today adults in the room are fighting against I don't have to tune to you. I have a lot of other things that I can go to. And I remember when I was a kid, for example, television started at 6 o'clock in the evening, and it was only one channel. So you had to engage with something. You had to create it also. And that brings me to something that you said, that the algorithm knowing and feeding us to what these things we like, it robs us of finding things by chance and getting to learn things about yourself that you don't even know about yourself. And that's what I'm a little bit afraid of the algorithm, is to where are the hidden seeds of something that can bloom in us and younger people that we may not get to see because the algorithm robbed it.
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I mean, there's the algorithms give us great convenience and can be really cool at times. But like you said, they also, I guess, don't allow us to explore or to get views that are different to our own. And that's a bit scary at times when you think about it. And we've seen in different even documentaries, like The Social Dilemma was the big one that came out a few years ago, where kids can really easily get radicalized when you think you're only hearing one perspective and you think, oh, that's how the majority think. But really, it's just kind of narrowing that worldview. And I think one of the things that I personally loved about my time in school, and I think has really helped me in my job today a lot, is like the ability to debate and to hear new ideas and to consider them. And so I'm not saying that younger people don't have that, but like you said, I think the algorithms kind of limit that in some ways. So it's definitely something I think that parents and leaders and educators will do well to be aware of when they're talking to and instructing and mentoring young people.
Yeah, in the focus group, there were some young girls that they had debates in the philosophy class, and they loved it because the teacher empowered them, and the teacher was like the facilitator. They just let them debate the subjects, didn't intervene much. And one thing that they said, I got to know people better in the classroom, talking and debating with them, that I didn't get to know maybe even in recess or in the breaks that we have in school. And it's important to have debates, and they do want to engage in debates. Just create the conditions for them to debate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's really important, and a great observation. The conditions where they feel safe as well, and they're not going to get ridiculed, and you lay the ground rules and show why a topic's important. I think that's really helpful.
I want to explore another one of the stereotypes that I hear a lot, because I'm also enjoying myth busting. I like to or confirming if something actually has some ground for truth. Two aspects that I hear also from practitioners is that younger generations, they are very used to texting, and so they're great at texting, fast texting, and this hinders, presence, in-person connection and interaction, because they're so used to this kind of fast language that is even shortened, And at the same time, I also see a lot of practitioners wanting to include more technology in their learning sessions, because they think like, well, they now like to engage like that, so I'm going to do more of that. Is there a truth that younger generations are more easily communicating in texting, and is that influencing how they behave in social settings, in-person settings?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think, we saw it with my generation, the millennials, like we were on MSN and we got really good at texting, and we see the Gen Z slang come through as well. And they're using that in the workplace, which we're kind of saying, oh, it's not the place to use slay and, things like that, those words. But yeah, I think there is something to be said for workplaces and classrooms and other spheres or communities where we're trying to teach this generation to incorporate some technology. But I think also, and this is a piece of research we did a few years ago, where the kids themselves were saying we don't want to be on technology all the time, and like the workplace and the schoolyard and the youth group or whatever that is a place for us to not have to be on technology, because we know that we're on the device, all the time. And those of us who maybe work in the knowledge economy, who are on a laptop every day, sometimes you want to come home and get off the screen and get off the device and engage with, the real world. So I think a balance of both is always good. Exploring maybe creative ways that we can meet the generation where they're at, but also going, okay, we're going to put some boundaries in place and help them engage with the world around them in a way that they're not maybe used to, or that forces them to get off. Because I think that the FOMO comment earlier is a real thing. And they're like, well, I might want to go off. We've seen this in our research. The majority of young people said they want to go off social media, but they want to for themselves, but they don't want to because they'll miss out on what's going on with their friends. And things move so quickly. So if everyone in the class is forced to, get off and go and do an activity, then they're like, okay, well, I don't have a choice, so I'm not missing out. But when we give them the choice, I think they feel that pressure to kind of get on and do it that way. So I definitely think a mix is probably, the ideal.
And social media brings also another term that I've listened to is FOPO. You heard of FOPO?
No, I haven't.
It's fear of other people's opinions. And social media brings that to a higher level. And we as humans, we scan the world for approval and disapproval. So it's like, if I post this, will someone comment on this? If I put this picture, will someone comment and say something that it's, so we're always fearful of other people's opinions. And there's a lot of FOPO, I feel, also in younger generations because of the constant presence of other people's opinions, because we all had like a critical parent or a critical teacher or whatever, but it's thousands of people like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think like a lot of what we talk about like in our work is like key intrinsic human needs that all generations have, but it's just heightened for younger people in some ways, like FOMO. I don't think anyone likes feeling left out, regardless of whether you're older or younger. And I care what other people think as well. And I put content out there, and if no one likes it, you're like, oh, is that a reflection of me? And I'm not a Gen Z. So I think it impacts us all, but particularly when they're in those like really vulnerable years for, their youth, and there's a lot going on. Their world's changing, their bodies are changing. They're trying to work out what they want to do for work, like what their purpose is in life. It's a lot of pressure. And then when you throw in a device that just amplifies that, and in some ways they can't escape it. Like one thing we talk about, a challenge for young people throughout all of time has been bullying. But cyberbullying is like another element of that, where it's hard to escape that, and it can feel like it's not just you leave school and you left it at the schoolyard. It follows you home, and it kind of has a different impact. So yeah, I think it's one of those intrinsic human needs that we all want to feel, like we're valued and our opinions are valued. So that FOPO is something I'll definitely be thinking about and commenting on. So thanks for that. It's great to learn of a new word. The other one I've heard is not FOMO but JOMO, the joy of missing out. When you're a bit older and like a night in with nothing on, that sounds great. So it's different life stages, in terms of the social aspect and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And just throwing another thing that I was thinking, David Yeager, I think he's from Yale. He has a very good book. It's called 10 to 25, where he studies people from 10 to 25. And the importance of having high standards, but high support. And I feel that sometimes, like he says in the book, that people go to the very high support, but don't have standards. And it's called like the kids are criticized for parents being too passive and don't having standards for behaving or for engaging with others, but they do need both. And there's the opposite of being like the drill sergeant, very high standards, and not having support. And I believe that we can use technology to give them the support they need, but also the standards, and communicate the standards that we want young people to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too. Yeah, I think that's really important and a really great way to, help this generation in these times and with their own unique sort of contextual challenges, to give them some of those, frameworks that encourage them and help them and give them a toolkit almost in terms of like, and that's a part of, I think, our role as mentors and leaders, as parents, as educators, is we can't be with them forever. And so equipping them with those toolkits, those strategies for when things get too loud or when the feedback does come, and building resilience. I think that's the other thing that we see. I think that every generation needs, and again, the unique context that's shaping the alphas and the Gen Zs is maybe tweaking how we might need to sort of adjust some of those toolkit pieces to help them sort of thrive in their own unique context.
Yeah.
So I was hearing you, throughout our conversation, we were tapping into different aspects that can shape a learning space, an ideal learning space, let's say, or learning experiences for the younger generations. We talked about the importance of the visual aspect of it. We said that as we move from less spaces, then the need to open the space, a safe space for them to share opinions and to feel that there's no FOPO in the room, that they can express their opinions and others can disagree and it's still safe. It feels to me that these generations maybe are more prompt to co-creation and to self-directed learning and to, engaging in information on their own styles. What tips would you give to educators and youth workers who are designing for these new generations, designing learning experiences, I mean? Yeah,
I think it's really important to have this balance I think, of unstructured and free, and giving them autonomy and that co-creator and helping them feel involved rather than that hierarchical command and control. You will do what I've said. And, the whole classroom structures across the generations has evolved, where there's one teacher at the front and there's rows of really neat tables like what the baby boomers had, to more co-creative spaces and collaboration. So I think pairing the collaborative sort of self-directed learning with structure. I think young people still need structure and still need boundaries. And I think if we go too far down that path, in terms of that maybe self-directed learning, we might lose some of that mentorship that we know these younger generations need. So my advice, which is quite broad, I guess, in terms of, for spaces and activities, is a combination of both. And with Gen Alpha particularly, I think we are seeing them be a bit more like that co-creator. They think they want to be involved. They've kind of been shaped in that world, even from like Roblox and Minecraft, where they're like world building and creating solutions and then that sort of thing. I think they're going to be used to that, and I think that will be helpful for them. But I still think there are aspects of the past in terms of, establishing some elements of authority and discipline and building resilience while still incorporating elements of, how education and learning is evolving. So I would say the best of both is probably, the ideal.
Yeah, and it's about the standards that Rui was talking about, right? We can set higher standards and offer this support, this personalized support that the new generations are also used to, kind of having this either one-to-one or mentorship or trustful people that they can share their fears with and get information that they can trust.
And boundaries can bring calm to a person, because if I know the limits, I'm not exploring endlessly. And even if you need to do some research, if you have the boundaries of the research, it's more helpful than search about anything that you want.
Information overloading. Yeah, it's too much. Yeah. Or like decision fatigue.
Yeah, and boundaries help in decision fatigue, because if I know that I have to be at home, for example, at 10 o'clock, I'm not deciding, should I go this or should I go that or should I do that? And that's it.
Yeah, exactly right.
One last question about this generation, and then we're going to go to our closing questions of this episode. One concern, a genuine concern that I hear from educators about the new generations is the state of their mental health. Do you see a higher predominance of mental health issues in this new generation, namely Gen Z and Gen A? And if so, what kind of issues are raising up?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen, particularly with Gen Z, I think it's a little bit maybe too early to tell with the alphas, but definitely with Gen Z, we're seeing higher rates of loneliness and social isolation. And I mean, over time, each generation, I think, has had the breakdown of community as technology's kind of risen up the ranks. We're replacing, I guess, the in-person community places with digital communities, which can offer some great aspects, but are not a replacement, I don't think. And we have done that. We've replaced the in-person community with the digital, which I think has been not great for our mental health. And I think we saw that with the pandemic. One thing, I was involved with a Generation Alpha book, authoring that. Another book I've been involved with is called Wellbeing, and it was interesting to kind of view work and look at work. And we were writing about that and how work is more than just a place that we go to get paid. It's connection, it's community. And I think for many people, when they had to kind of give up going to the workplace in the pandemic without that being a choice, they thought, oh, wow, I didn't realize how much I relied on the workplace for social interaction. And I think that has the pandemic probably had some big impacts on young people as well, in terms of increasing that social isolation and therefore the loneliness that comes with that. So, I mean, I think with Gen Z as well, we have seen an increase in the proportion of young people who say they have kind of identified with a mental health condition. And we've done a little bit of research into this, and I don't have all the authority to really say too much, but I think one thing that's been really great and also maybe not so great in the same time has been how we have more language now to talk about it. And it's fantastic that the stigma has been removed and we're talking about it more and there's not that shame with it. But I think maybe we've gone too far and now it's almost like used, I think, in some ways as an excuse or a reason, or I'm scared to do something, so I won't even try. And that's where we have to have the wisdom of older generations to come in and go, it's okay to do things when you're scared, and you should do things when you're scared. Now, I say that as not a clinical psychologist or someone who can weigh in on where someone has, an anxiety, mental health challenge versus when they're kind of fearful and they're using that term. But yeah, I think there's been some great developments around removing the stigma, removing the shame, but also a little bit of a challenge there in terms of, maybe even overuse. But definitely we have seen, I think, more younger people identifying with that, which is obviously not a great thing. Nobody wants that for this next generation, but hopefully the leaders, the mentors, the educators, the parents, we can help them. We can do what has been done for generations in terms of getting back in community, getting back in-person connection, finding passion and hobbies that give you motivation and encouragement. And I think that's going to be really helpful and an antidote to overcoming some of those mental health sort of challenges that this next generation is facing.
As a clinical psychologist, I can say that anxiety has been rising. Because I feel that a lot of things is, like you said, we need to change there's more vocabulary regarding, but we are losing a lot of words to describe the complex human experience, because not everything is anxiety, and people start labeling it as anxiety. I can be nervous. I can be overwhelmed. There's a lot of words to describe the human experience. And I feel also that we've swung to the other side, like you were saying, that everything is a clinical issue. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have concerns for mental health. I'm totally on board with it. But I feel that we need to be more open to feeling the nervousness, to feel the overwhelm. And I feel that sometimes the conversation goes to, oh, this is bad, and this is not bad. This is part of the human experience to feel all those things, and we should look into it. And it doesn't make you a flawed human being, but we sure need to engage in the conversation that loneliness can be also a way to bring that anxiety, because the fake connection of the internet, it's not real connection. And when people are lonely, they are prone to more and more mental health issues. So we need to look at the engaging and going back to being in-person communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely, 100%. I'm glad we've got a clinical psychologist to weigh in on that.
I recently had an interesting conversation. I was talking with a few teenagers from my family, and we were talking just about their daily experiences, the teacher they like, the teacher they don't like, the colleagues, how parents say this or that, or how they put boundaries, whatever. So it was just about their experience. But the language was all about, I hate this teacher, and he traumatized me, and I'm depressed. And the words were so strong, and mostly the negative ones were so strong. And the new generations, they've learned this vocabulary that we didn't have. Well, I didn't have when I was growing up. And I think it's great. They can identify better their feelings. They can ask for help. They can support each other maybe better. But at a certain moment, I had to tell them, okay, let's bring this down, because not everything is that dramatic. Maybe in TikTok, you use also a lot of this language, but in real life, there's a spectrum. spectrum, you probably don't hate that teacher so much, and you're probably not that traumatized in that situation that they were describing, that it was just about a boring teacher. I think it's like, you dislike him. That's fine. That's great. And maybe you don't find him a great teacher. That's okay. But and then afterwards we made it a joke. And now when we talk with each other, we exaggerate on purpose. Like whenever they say I don't like chicken, we're making jokes about it. Like, oh, you're gonna die. Chicken is gonna be. We brought a bit of humor. We're coming to a close. We don't want to take more of your time either. But so normally we always ask a guest to leave a question to another guest. And so our previous guest, who was talking about psychological safety in learning spaces, she kindly left a question for you. So we ask you to answer. Kui.
What do you need to feel safe and show up as your best self?
It's a great question. We actually put this in the Generation Alpha book, these three E's that I reflect on for me personally as well. And I think they've been really helpful in my career and my life. And when I think about, whether it's my parents or mentors or even in the workplace, like teachers and my boss and, people, leaders who I've looked up to, who I've felt safe with and safe to try new things and to innovate or whatever it might be, these 3 E's have applied. So the first E is to encourage. I think all of us need encouragement, especially when we're trying something new. I mean, when I think one of the first books that I was involved with, I was quite young and I thought, oh, there's no way I can do this. And there was encouragement from the people and the team around me to say, no, you've been here for a long time and you've got expertise, and it's not just your thoughts, but it's the research and, that encouragement to get over that self-doubt. So the first E is to encourage, but if it's just encouragement without sort of the second E, which is equip, in terms of training and support and resourcing, then that's where I think we fail, and it can be viewed in a negative experience if we fail, because I think failure in and of itself is not a bad thing. There's so many stories of great sportsmen and business people who talk about you need to fail over and over again. You need to be able to fail so that you can get better, and that sort of growth mindset kind of aspect. So encourage, equip. And then the third part, I think, is to entrust and to release, and to, with the next generation, to go, okay, you are young, but I'm gonna entrust that you will go and speak at this big conference. And I remember the first time I had to speak at a big conference, and I think I cried the night before, and I'd prepared and I'd equipped, but I was entrusted to go, and I did it, and it was scary, but I learned, and then I got better and was able to progress and grow. And I feel like, I've experienced that a lot in my career so far, which I'm really grateful to the leaders I've had in my life who have not just said something nice, but actually gone those second and third steps of actually equipping and training and helping and upskilling, and then entrusting me with those opportunities. So that's something I've learned. That's something we developed and talked about, and we put it in the Generation Alpha book, that I think hopefully if we apply those processes, that process for young people, we can help them to feel safe, but to also take risks and to try new things and fail and get better at life and love and learning and work and whatever kind of, thing that they're sort of tasked to do.
Yeah, your experience reminded something that Russ Harris talks about, is the actions of confidence come before the feeling of confidence. You have to do it without even feeling confident. Then you build confident of doing it again. But the actions of confidence come first, then the feeling of confidence.
Yeah, which is not what I think you think when you're young and you're starting out.
No, if I feel confident, I will do it.
Exactly. I'll wait till I feel confident. I'll just wait. I'll wait. You might be waiting for a long time. You can wait your whole life. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's really, really a great great tip there. And I love how you shaped it into encourage, equip, and entrust. It's a beautiful way to look at it. Ashley, do you want to leave a question for our next guest?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that stood out to me when we were working on the Gen Alpha book was how almost pessimistic some people are about the future and about the future generations. And I mean, sure, I understand, like, we've got some big challenges globally and politically and with the climate and so many areas of life and economically. Like, there are some challenges for sure, but I think we don't do the next generation any favors by dwelling on that all the time and having that perspective with them. So I think for me, I'd love to pose the question to the next guest, what's a real positive or great thing you've seen about young people or about the next generation? I think as we think and encourage and use those words of encouragement and focus on the positives while also being aware of the realities and the negatives and the challenges, but also making sure that we do have a positive attitude and outlook and mindset. I think that's going to help the next generation. So yeah, I'd love to hear what a positive experience someone has had or where they've seen a real positive attribute of the next generation sort of come through and share a story about that.
Thank you. That's a great question, to focus on the positive sides of what's coming up and to foster that and to try to work with that potential. Ashley, it was such a pleasure to have you. You shared so much. We will share with our listeners the link to the book as well,
the books.
which we recommend. The book.
Work well-being also, not only Generation Alpha.
Exactly, both of them. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. It was truly inspiring to listen to you, to your journey, but also to the knowledge that you are so well portraying to the rest of the world about these new generations and about how we're evolving, and to have your take on this. And I'm sure our listeners will also learn a lot from this. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This podcast was brought to you by Tim Maes, recorded and edited by Rui Branco for the international project Inception of Learning, financed by the Erasmus Plus program. Our great partners for this project are the associations Fundacja Institut Innovacije from Poland, Jasna Idnina from North Macedonia, and Odd Socks from Montenegro.